Since today is Guru Purnima on the podcast, we'll speak about why a guru is important and if it is necessary to have a guru. So a lot of people probably don't even know what Guru Purnima is. But today actually is Guru Purnima, and coincidentally tomorrow is the Dalai Lama's birthday, which, obviously Guru Purnima falls at this time this year because of the moon. And a lot of people, like I said, aren't familiar with Guru Purnima, but probably are familiar with Buddha Purnima, and Buddha Purnima was celebrated a few months ago. And so Guru Purnima, even being older than that, is related to one of the first sages within Hinduism, Vyasa, or in English we would say Vyasa, and there are certain reasons why we say Sanskrit words in English different, but we're not going to get into that. I'd recommend looking at the Sanskrit channel. There's many reasons. But either way you say Vyasa, we understand what you're saying. And many people don't know who probably Vyasa was, and Vyasa is attributed with actually compiling the 4 Vedas and also writing the Mahabharata and also the 18 Puranas. So a large portion of the Hindu scriptures. When we talk about the Hindu scriptures, people say, in Hinduism, do they have a holy book like the Quran in Islam or the Bible and in Christianity? And well, as we know with Hinduism, it's a lot more complex and a lot more in-depth. And so there are a lot more text, and that goes back to before Vyasa's time, as you and I know. So we're talking about the original Vedic period where the Vedas were one. So the Veda was one, and Veda means knowledge, specifically the knowledge of Brahman, so the knowledge of the ultimate reality, the non-dual nature that for whatever reason we see subjectively. And then at the end of the Kali Yuga at the beginning of the Kali Yuga, Vyasa compiled the Vedas into 4. And this was to adapt to our capacities in the so-called Dark Age, if you believe in the Yugas or not. Some people probably don't. Some people do. If they've watched my new film, they may believe it or they may not. It's up to you, really. But that's the story, right? So Vyasa compiled the Vedas to adapt to our capacities, and he wrote the Puranas and also all of that to adapt to our spiritual capacities in this so-called Dark Age. And so, but then he also wrote the Mahabharata, which is probably one of the foundational pillars of classical Hinduism or Sanatana Dharma. Even though the Vedas are the original, but like a lot of the culture and that is built around the Mahabharata. And so, and the Mahabharata and also the Ramayana are considered itihasas. So itihasas is like so-called history, according to Hindus, like a classical story, which is kind of history. Whether you believe they're actual events or mythology is completely up to you. But what's interesting with the evolution from when the Veda was one to when Vyasa wrote it down was the Veda back, we're going a long time back here, is a so-called text that you call Shruti. So Shruti means what is heard. So there were these enlightened rishis that apparently, it was kind of like if you think of like divine revelation in Christianity, where the word of God came through them, but they didn't write it down back in that day because the best way for transmission, because there was no paper and so forth and so on, was to constantly recite this knowledge that they have, and they pass this on down, usually from father to son. That's why you see in the Upanishads, you see this whole father-son relationship with knowledge, and so the Upanishads being essentially a part of the Vedas, the philosophical thought of the Vedas, and actually to in mentioning the Upanishads is probably considered as closest as to like the holy scriptures of the Hindus, if we needed to have one, you know what I mean? Obviously, after that, you would probably say the Bhagavad Gita, which is part of the Mahabharata. complex, right? So complex. But then, so getting back to what I was saying, so you have this Shruti, so you have this, what is heard, and then as we came at the end of Dwapara Yuga, into the Kali Yuga, where you had this war in Kurukshetra, and Krishna advising Arjun what to do and how he should follow his dharma instead of like engaging in his individual mind. And so, and when Krishna had left the world, so to speak, Vyasa wrote down the Vedas, compiled the Vedas, and then eventually wrote the Puranas and the Mahabharata. And so these texts, so when we look at the Puranas, the Mahabharata, these texts like this, these are called Smriti, so these are what is remembered. So Vyasa is what is remembered, so from an older time, from the Vedic period. That's why like when you study Hinduism, they nut it down into periods, right? So they have the Vedic period and they have the Puranic period. And so the Puranic period is usually attributed to the time of Vyasa, and obviously the Kurukshetra war and so forth and so on, which is documented in the Mahabharata, and obviously the story of Rama.
So what is heard is how you call it?
Shruti.
Shruti.
Yeah,
and what is remembered
is Smriti.
Smriti.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a really fine line, right? So it's a fine line between, again, like I guess if you're a classic Sanskritist, it's easy. Like it's like you and I speak in English, but if you just hear it, you're like Shruti, Smriti. It's similar in sound, right? A little bit.
So Shruti, which is what is heard,
yes,
is what Vedas.
Is
Vedas.
Yeah. And the Veda, it was one actually when it was Shruti.
Shruti, just a one.
Yeah, it was one.
Like big text.
Yeah, it wasn't even text. It was what is heard. So it was
what is heard. Oh, okay. So just a verbally transmitted. Generation to generation.
Yeah. So which came from the rishis, whoever they were. Some people attribute those rishis to the Sapta rishis, which they sort of worshipped a lot in yoga. And the Sapta rishis are mentioned through the texts. So you would think that the Sapta rishis, like in all likelihood, were the authors maybe of the Vedas, but it's so mysterious, right? So like, because you're going back, according to some Indian scholars, we can be going back to like 10,000 years, and obviously a lot of archaeologists and so forth and so on, people who study ancient texts and dating, they don't agree with those sorts of time frames. They agree maybe time period maybe between 3,000, 1,500, so forth and so on. But definitely the Mahabharata and the Ramayana and that were definitely written at least between 800 CE and 800 BCE and 200 CE. So you got this kind of period where it's kind of like translates sort of as the Puranic period. So when the Puranas and that, and the Puranas, the 18 Puranas basically built the kind of, what do you say, like the mathematics of the Hindus, the astrology, the yugas. So in the Vishnu Purana, the Bhagavata Purana, these texts contribute to kind of like the time cycles, the understanding of the universe in that sense. And so, but as I was saying, the Mahabharata and the Ramayana are kind of like they are classified also as Itihasa. So Itihasa being like classical history, right? So what the events that have happened before, and it is believed that the events of the Ramayana were written, I think, 300 years later, but that wasn't by Vyasa. That was by Valmiki, and so, but Vyasa, because Vyasa was so influential in kind of, a lot of people actually refer to him as the first guru or the first sage, because he was the one who actually wrote down all this knowledge and also, began this kind of lineage of guru disciple down the path.
Yes, Vyasa was just a kind of one person,
Well, there's a lot of speculation about that because, like, a lot of people, when you look at the magnitude of the Puranas and the Mahabharata, and also compiling the Vedas, and there's also other works attributed to him too. It's a lot of work, but obviously, modern authors would probably say, it's okay, you know, like, because, you know, a lot of authors these days just write, you know, dusk till dawn. But I think that when you look at that period, it's kind of like it is. You may be skeptical that he wrote actually all of them, and some people actually believe, which is kind of similar to Taoism with Lao Tzu. Some people actually believe it was either one or two people who were writing as Vyasa, not one specific person. But again, Hindus would disagree with that. That would just be researchers and scholars who would suggest that. It's the same with Lao Tzu, right? With Lao Tzu, people think that, people like Edward Slinland and other scholars and that think that Lao Tzu was not an actual historical figure, but was rather probably a group of people who were compiling knowledge and writing it and trying to disseminate it through society and so forth and so on. And look, that's all semantics, right? Deep down in the end, it's all semantics.
Yeah, that's true.
But it is interesting, right? So it is interesting, but yeah, you raise a good point that Vyas probably, who knows, maybe was a few people, or and a lot of people suggest that, right? So a lot of mythologists and that suggest that if you look at the textual timing of certain books, and like you're looking over a long period of time, and there are some dates when you do study the history of classical Hinduism that may, in some sense, not add up to actually, you know, the timing of the text and so forth and so on. But again, that's not my field of expertise. We basically here to speak about the philosophy and so forth and so on. So, but that is interesting. Like, so when we look at Vyasa, he was like the first guru, and we're beginning this whole lineage of guru disciple, and basically like. And as you and I know, it's kind of interesting because when we look around the world, not many people know who Vyasa is, and they see images of him, they don't know really who he is. We've done this in the past before, right? When we've been in Thailand, we've seen images of Vyasa, and we thought that he was Patanjali, because the similarity, like in some of the sculptures that you've seen, but you know, he's looks like a classical yogi, right? So like the beard and the.
In the statue, we see that with the serpent around his body and around his head, and
that's Patanjali.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's Patanjali. See, that's the thing. See, like there's Patanjali who has the serpent, and Vyasa's just like usually just dressed just a yogi, like a yogi, maybe with a text in front of him or so, something like that. But some of the sculptures look very similar. There are sometimes serpents and so forth and so on. Depends on where you go. But a lot of people don't know, because they don't. I think a lot of people don't think of who is the author of the Bhagavad Gita and stuff like this. You know what I mean? Like they just read the Bhagavad Gita, or they read a translation of it. But not many people think actually who was the author of this, and because that has become the popular text, right, in Hinduism. Like even probably more so than the Upanishads, maybe. People think of that as the holy book of the Hindus, and Hindus would probably say, I don't know about that, because the original, is the Vedas, and encompassed in the Vedas is the Upanishads.
Yeah, because the story of Arjuna is a very famous story,
exactly,
and it's from Bhagavad Gita. So
yeah. People are attracted to that sort of story, right? And that's only such a small part of the Mahabharata. So you got like this massive like story, but then a lot of the spiritual philosophy of the Hindus is focused actually on that, just that small part of the Mahabharata. Probably the most interesting part of the Mahabharata is the Bhagavad Gita. So people think about that, but they don't think about who the author is. They don't think about who set this whole Sanatana Dharma in motion. And to clarify for people, Sanatana Dharma is what Hinduism actually should be called, because that's how it is referred to in the Hindu scriptures. And Sanatana Dharma is the eternal natural way. So this is again a similarity between Hinduism and Taoism that people don't consider. A lot of people, I don't know why, you and I always been like a little bit curious about this, why people aren't so attracted to Hinduism who are outside of India, you know what I mean? But because like when you look at some of the foundational tenets, it's almost this, I mean, not the same, but like the principles are the same. Brahman, Tao, you know, talking about it as some sort of eternal way of living. Like, so for example, Sanatana Dharma means the eternal way, the natural Dharma for not just humans, but also they observe the way animals, how they naturally exist. So it's all about how we should naturally exist, you know, like how we should follow our nature, our Dharma. And they built a whole philosophy around that, as you know, like they built a caste system and everything like that. But Vyasa was the man who propelled Hinduism into what it is today. And the thing is that because a lot of people don't know Vyasa, they don't know like the thread from when he created the compiled the Vedas up until the Mahabharata, and that when you explore this thread or this so-called spiritual history, you see that he was significant in propelling the spiritual law of the East forward. You know, so he was very instrumental in the, like, though people may say unrelated, but instrumental in the birth of Jainism, Buddhism, and also contribute probably to a lot of Taoist thought, which, you know, people may scoff at, but we don't really know like how much India had influenced China and regions like that, because that's kind of a pretty grey area in history. Obviously, we understand that through Buddhism, but you know, when we see like Shiva lingams and stuff like that in Vietnam and so forth and so on, like, I mean, there's a whole missing chapter here.
Yeah, we don't really know. It's just so long ago. Like,
exactly.
Yeah. And we see these random Shiva lingams in Vietnam and even Malaysia.
Yeah.
And how did it get there and how long ago was it? Mm. And again, like speaking of heritage sites, like Angkor Wat is a Hindu temple.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's Cambodia, which is quite far away from India, and that's so long ago was built. We don't really know when it was built precisely.
I think they know sort of a region, of when, but it wasn't like it was. It's not that it was like so ancient. But the thing is, and in your point is that it's around that area for a long period of time before probably sculptures and archaeology and that, you know, those statues and that get built. Same with Bali, right? Same with Indonesia. So, like, you know, we're only speculating that Vyasa may have influenced possibly Taoism back in ancient times, because we're talking about so long ago. You know, we're talking about before, like, they even contemplated building temples. Temple structures and that came after.
That is right.
Came after the Mahabharata and all these textual, these Hindu texts.
So we could say that Vyasa's teaching or work, or whatever you want to call it, had spread throughout Asia, basically, exactly. Because we can see the evidence from the temples and the sculptures and whatnot.
Yeah.
So, yeah, definitely, he was the instrumental to establish in the Eastern thought. Basically.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he propelled like spirituality in the East. You know, even if we don't consider China, majority of the rest of the East forward. You know, so if we look at South Asia, Southeast Asia, so
they're just the foundation of Eastern thought in general. It's not just Hinduism, not just isolated in the Hindu tradition,
no.
wisdom tradition. It's more so to do with the entire Eastern wisdom tradition.
Exactly.
And that's his work was the foundation of that. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why he's considered the first guru. You know, and that's why Hindus and even Buddhists and Jains, they celebrate Guru Purnima and they respect Vyasa. You know, they know why we celebrate this day, and why it's important. And why it's important for all of us to celebrate Guru Purnima is because we should have respect for our spiritual teachers, and we should give gratitude because they are the ones who are passing on the knowledge. Again, this whole idea of guru-disciple lineage, which is why things like the Sanatana Dharma, Buddhism, and Taoism have survived, because they've been passed down, right? It's a passing down of knowledge. So we went from the Shruti of the passing down of the herd to the Smriti of the passing down of what is remembered. We are all part of the what is remembered now, right? We're remembering the Vedic period. We're remembering the ancient times, and we're passing on that knowledge. It's part of a cultural evolution. It's part of the accumulative culture, right? But as some scholars, and this is the beauty about Hinduism, is it's an ever-evolving philosophy. So as you're moving down the path, as you know from studying Advaita Vedanta, you get to influential gurus such as Gaudapada and Shankara, who kind of reformed and revolutionized Vedic thought. They were tapping into what the essence of the Vedas were or are, which is classical non-dualism, and basically have contributed to the main philosophy of of how we think of Hinduism today. Though a lot of people think of yoga as Hinduism, Nyaya, and all of these other philosophies, but Vedanta holds a special place because it's kind of, Vedanta is translated as the end of the Vedas, so the end of knowledge. So, and people who study Vedanta study three of the classical texts, which is the Upanishads, Bhagavad Gita, Brahma Sutras. So you have those three texts which kind of build a philosophy of the Vedas, but that could never happen without Vyasa, right? And that would never have been exposed if it wasn't for gurus such as Gaudapada and Shankara. And so, that's the interesting thing about Hinduism. It's kind of like an evolving, growing philosophy, but the seed is the same, being the Veda, being the knowledge of Brahman. So,
yeah, the essence of teaching is still there, but there's a lot of the human dynamics, social dynamics, and cultural dynamics always evolving and changing, so that the essence still remains, but from guru to disciple, then the disciple becomes a guru, and then the knowledge passed down from generation to generation, form into different shape, but it's there for us to always see and learn. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that crux of like what Vyasa had documented, and the crux of the spiritual law of the East, and I'm saying L-O-R-E here, the spiritual law of the East is this non-dual understanding of the world, right? So we see this within Buddhism and within Taoism, which likely began with the Vedas, right? So everything with what we've been talking about is talking about, like, for example, like, Brahman in the Vedas was, the central focus was Atman as Brahman, right? And you and I are ultimately Brahman. And then when we get into the Mahabharata and the Puranas and this and that, this is when Brahma and Vishnu and Shiva become more of a central focus, and then you have more of a relationship with personal gods as opposed to Brahman being the absolute, impersonal, undifferentiated reality that is the fundamental substratum of existence, which we are all a part of as one. And there is that difference, but then, what Vyasa has explained, and what Guru to Disciple has explained since the beginning from the rishis, is that we need to dispel this illusion of the sense of I. So you need to understand fundamentally the knowledge, the Veda. The Veda is kind of like, the Veda can be looked at as like a prescription drug, right? You're in schizophrenic like delusion, and then you get the pill, and you're like, wait, I'm not this person here, and the world is not as I thought it is. So yeah, that's the role of the guru, right? So we need to remember that guru, when we translate guru into English, means the dispeller of darkness or the dispeller of ignorance. That's what the guru specifically means. So it means the guru gives you that prescription drug of the Veda, and then you're completely cured of your delusion, your hypnosis, and the illusion of separation, and the illusion of the person you think you are, the stories that we cling to about ourselves, everything, the habits and the tendencies, the vasanas and the karma that that we're continually manifesting life after life. They cure you of the delusion of this. And sure, there are a lot of charlatans out there. We need to clarify that. But in general, most gurus are genuine. And believe it or not, there's way more gurus that you have ever heard about that don't have YouTube channels, and they don't have this and that. So maybe some of the ones that do have YouTube channels and this and that, who knows? We don't want to say anything negative. But yes, there are charlatans. People do use this to their advantage. But in general, most gurus are genuine and follow this spiritual law that Vyasa propelled at the beginning of the Kali Yuga until now. So, and that's the role of the guru, right? The role of the guru is to dispel your ignorance, is to get rid of your ignorance that you are this person, and to basically completely dissolve that sense of I, that you don't exist. And that's why it's important, and that's why actually the Upanishads are translated as to sit near. But that can be translated in a few different ways. So Upanishads mean to sit near the truth, right? But can mean to sit near, most people say to sit near a teacher, or it can mean to sit near the teachings. So ultimately the teachings are first, but usually it's the guru who passes on the teachings, right? And that's related to the Shruti tradition before the Smriti tradition. But it's like anything. You play violin, you need to learn from people who are more capable of playing the violin than you are, that will teach you things that were blind spots to you. And it's the same with the guru-disciple relationship. That's why it's important. Like, you need to, learn the knowledge from them.
Obviously, it's the most authentic way to learn the deep knowledge, such as Sanatana Dharma. But I guess there's also this kind of question can arise that do we really need one? Right? Obviously, we will need books or someone initially to get in contact with this knowledge from the start. Yes. But now there are so many books and studies out there that's available online, which is very close to all of us now. But I would still think that like learning directly from a Swami or a Guru, and we know this from our experience, that how important to actually be at presence with teacher or guru, or even not like these people not necessarily need to be your personal teacher or master, but just to be a presence of someone who are like guru or some sort, or who have such a strong presence of spiritual practice and whatnot. It's definitely very important and influential to our journey of learning things, and also to transform ourselves and this chaotic mind. So it's I think it's definitely that's necessary.
There's a few ways to look at it, right? Like there's those rare souls that have an aptitude for spiritual knowledge and have an aptitude for just understanding this stuff, like they understand how to open and close their hands. So Ramana Maharshi, right, is a good example, right? He never really had a guru, or he learned from a few swamis and this and that, but he didn't have a specific guru. So and he became a great sage. So there are rare cases, right? But most of the time we have to be in, and I liked what you said, where you have to be in the presence almost with these teachers. I mean, I guess the benefit of this day and age is that you can be sitting in Australia here and listening to someone like Swami Sarvapriyananda, who's in New York, and you are getting the knowledge. You are in satsang, but it's not the same as actually being in the presence, you know. But at the same time, you're still hearing the knowledge, and you're, you know, you just, there is no chance for, like, you know, one of the important things, obviously, in ashrams and also Buddhist monasteries is like asking questions to the guru and getting feedback, and, you know, in your understanding of where you're at, you know.
I think what the initial experience of that cracking your head, so to say, like that aha moment kind of thing, and that moment can most likely only can come from direct communication with somebody, I think. Like, doesn't necessarily need to be a teacher or a master, but just with somebody who have this knowledge of the Eastern tradition.
Yeah.
And without that direct interaction of energy and communication, you won't be able to look at yourself directly, because it's very personal and very intimate at the same time. So if you were to just read books and watching some videos online, of course they're very so important, but may not apply to you personally. Then that's where like a kind of a bit of a frustration and the feeling of the stuck at some point, right? Because they are definitely giving these great teachings, but maybe you know maybe you do understand what they say, but doesn't necessarily personally touches you. Then maybe there's some more direct interaction needs to take place, probably.
100%. Well, you and I know this because, like, we've traveled India and we know that the benefits of being in spiritual sanghas and environments and so forth and so on, how important it is to be around that atmosphere in some sense. Even if you just go to places like Bodh Gaya and you're around monks and that, and you can speak to them freely and so forth and so on, right? So there is a power in having direct communication, like you said, with a spiritual master, as opposed to just using YouTube or whatever thing online as some sort of just, it can become an entertainment device, right? You're watching it specifically just to, people become spiritual entertainers too, right? So they watch satsang after satsang just in entertainment, even though, don't get me wrong, like watching satsangs or being in satsangs is important to keep your mind in that place. And so obviously that's the benefit of having the online world, because, you know, you might have had a terrible day at work, but you can come home and listen to Swami Atmanananda or someone like this, you know what I mean? So it can ground you straight away, and then you know you're back to normal, so to speak, after a tough day. But there is a power in the presence, right, of a guru or a teacher, and you just have to be in the present. You don't have to be like, you know, one-on-one communication and so forth and so on, like, but like there's a lot of things that happen when you are in the presence, as you and I know. And so it's like, but there can be a limit to this too. You don't want to get too over the top. You know, there's like a lot of masters will talk about like stories about how a skilled disciple will have spent like 12 years, and it used to be like a prerequisite where you had to spend 12 years with a master. But as especially Vedanta evolved, that became kind of stupid, because it's like, what are you still doing here? You don't get it after 12 years? You know what I mean? And there are some stories, like, I think it's a story of Joshu and Zen, and this is kind of it's an older story and kind of like a koan, but like where Joshu went to, and I may have got the story a little bit wrong here, but went to the monastery and said, I want to know my Buddha nature. And then the master said, go wash the dishes. And then instantly enlightened. So, like that's a story of someone who's got a high aptitude for spiritual understanding, you know. And though that story may make no sense and it can completely irrational, that's the point of Zen. But the idea is that that's the potential we all have. It's not like a matter of being so actually, in some sense, sometimes being highly intellectually trained can actually be a detriment to your understanding. But the understanding comes just from a reorientation of your position. Like, so you were this person and someone just snapped you out of it, and then next minute you have an abidance in the self and the Atman or Buddha nature that was always there, and you know.
Yeah, we need to cultivate that very fine balance between intellectual understanding to this intuitive understanding.
Yep.
Isn't it?
Yep.
Like, I don't know if I read from a book or I heard from somebody. There's a disciple or monk who are in monastery, doing practice, intensive practice, and living in the little hut in the forest and doing the laundry washing, hand wash, of course. There's no machine.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah. So just do like put the soap and the clothes, and you just rub it around, and then rinse it out a couple of times, and they have like a tub they can use to put the water in and the wash clothes and whatnot. And when this person was doing this repetitively, so water was in the tub in the 1 minute, and you throw the water away and it goes down to drainage, and do it again and again. So water 1 minute was in the tub, but then once you tip it out and then goes to the drainage, and the tub is empty. So that this person had this deep realization of impermanence.
Yeah.
Like, it's nothing is permanent. Like, the water was in the tub 1 minute, and it was there as if it was always been there. But once you put in the drainage, then it disappeared. It's nothing is permanent. Things always change. This kind of realization. But again, if it was some other individual who were not very in touch with the sort of feeling aspect, then it would just like going through the motion kind of thing. Like, it wouldn't even...
Just water goes down the drain,
yeah,
that's
yeah,
it.
but that's how it is. Like, it's physics.
Yeah,
It's a bit like this.
Yeah.
So we need to have this kind of a subtle sensibility and sensitivity to feel a little bit more. And that's to also say, to feel ourselves, our mind, our emotional state a bit more as well. Because that awareness, when that awareness happens and that awareness meets the outside circumstance, then that sort of a little pop of a realization, realizing moments occur, I think.
Yes.
And so, like, of course, you need to know the such concept of impermanence, right?
Yeah.
Intellectually.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah. But how do you realize it fully?
Yeah, exactly.
You have to have an experience of it. Then you really know
Yeah.
what it is, not just intellectually know what that means.
Yeah.
You need to experientially know what it is to be able to even explain or have a full realization of what it is, really. So we need to have that good balance between intellectual learning and the intuitive feeling. And again, which is very important in Zen practice as well, like you mentioned about it. Yeah, so...
That's the contemplative mind, right? The contemplative mind where you're so in touch with that sensibility of the irrational, which is beyond rational, and you can feel that you kind of like, you're sensing metaphors everywhere. You know what I mean? Like you're looking at life, and everything has a deeper meaning. Like you said, you pour the water down the drain, and the feeling of impermanence hits you. Like, oh, this is what it is. Though you had read all the books before, but you haven't experienced just a natural experience, and then then it dawns on you, right? And it's like, it's like a lot of enlightenment stories where a lot of people say, oh, but all he did was do this. But then you go, no, but his whole history, he studied the Vedas and he studied Buddhism, but that realization came later when he had a specific experience, because he had, in some sense, if we use soil as an analogy, tilled the soil, right? He made the soil fertile for growth. And then the time came, and then the plant sprouted, the seed sprouted, and then they were instantly enlightened, so to speak.
Actually, that's one of the bigger reason why we actually wanted to bring people to these sacred places that we love to be at, especially in India, Nepal, and Thailand, for example, because for me personally, like, we watched lots of good videos and satsang videos online and reading great text. But when we actually got to a place like Arunachala, where Ramana resided most of his life, and when we were around such teacher or master figured individuals, I felt really very overwhelming, blissful state, which I never had it before. For example, like I would go. I know that individual from watching YouTube clips from whatever channel here and there, but when you actually see these people and being around that present is just a kind of not describable, like, and it's kind of like what you have heard and what you have learned instantly kind of evaporated, because you are in straight away. You are in that space right away. Yeah. So what you have learned and what you thought that you know is actually sense of like a, not illusion, but it was all actually words and writings. It doesn't actually, it means something, but doesn't compare to that overwhelming experience. The
actuality of it.
Yes. So when I had that feeling, like what I thought I knew is all just, it just like, I don't know, almost like a pretending to know that.
Yeah, but I think it's like tilling the soil a little bit, right? You tilled the soil before.
Right.
So, for example, you knew, well, we use Arunachala as an example. First time we went there was a long time ago, but we knew about, we had studied Advaita Vedanta for long periods of time, Ramana, and then, so you know about it, but then you actually go there, and it's like the experience then is probably even more overwhelming because you know about that.
That's actually true, because if you didn't know anything whatsoever, then you just got kind of dropped into the place. Then you're like, oh.
Well, do you remember that? I mean, it's horses for courses, but do you remember those two young girls were in a restaurant that time, and they just didn't get it. They were asking that lady, like, what's this place all about? Because it is a strange place if you don't know anything about Ramana Maharshi, or you don't know anything about Advaita Vedanta in general, or Vedanta. And you go to that place, and then you see people are walking around with downcast eyes and being very quiet. And it's a place where, like, when you arrive in Tiruvannamalai, where it's kind of like, oh, game on. Like, people here are serious. I mean, obviously there's the flim-flammers, there's the pretenders, the New Agers, but then there are the ones who are serious about it, and they're just being quiet, shanti, going to ashram every day, So it's kind of like game on. So if you are an outsider and you don't know anything about it, unless it depends on if you have a seed of that in you, that kind of like that Israeli couple we mentioned on the last podcast. They didn't have much of a calling to any sort of Hindu philosophy, but when they went to Tiruvannamalai, their whole life was completely changed, and their whole life was about getting back to that place. And so, I think you are right too, but I think that for your case, because I know you, is that you had all this knowledge deep down, and then when you were there, it's even more. It means even more.
Yeah, maybe was much more like a surreal kind of feel, like this is reality.
This
now.
is reality.
Like,
Yeah.
what I saw virtually
Yeah.
became actual reality.
Actual
and
reality.
I am in direct environment, surrounded by that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And by people who are really dead sincere about it. I remember the first time we ever went to Tiruvannamalai, we went to Tasty Cafe. Shout out to Tasty Cafe. And we went there, and then you notice people, like, most people were all on their own and quiet and just eating, and that's kind of how you and I are in general. And so it was a little bit overwhelming that, oh my God, there's other people in the world who are really serious about this and dedicated to it. And it's not really a place for people to go and party and be loud. And so if you want that, go to Goa, But Tiruvannamalai is completely different, and it can be overwhelming, And you and I, we cry many times we go places like that, just tears of joy, and happiness. And again, that comes back to not just Arunachala, but also Ramana being a great guru, and the spiritual power of the place. It just reverberates, and it almost pulls people to that holy mountain, Same with many sacred sites, but you and I are very have a strong connection to that place, and also many other places throughout Asia, but that place particular. And it puts you, like, it's interesting because, like, when you're studying, let's say Vedanta, for example, right? So any of us who are interested in Advaita Vedanta, this is the path of Jnana Yoga, right? So the path of Jnana is the path of knowledge. And it's interesting because when you talk about the path of knowledge, and all the Swamis talk about this, is that it is about intellectual discernment up until a certain point, So when we have categories like Atman, Paratman, Brahman, Parabrahman, these mean something at a certain level of spiritual understanding. But then you get to a level of understanding where they're all same. They're all same, right? So it's there. The knowledge is there, the Veda is there to understand to a certain degree where it's not needed. Like the philosophies are like spiritual companions to a certain perspective, to a certain point. They're my companions on the journey, and then eventually it's, like they use the boat analogy a lot in the East, right? So they're like a boat. You're going over the river of samsara, and then you send the river back to. You send the boat back to hopefully someone else to come back on the journey. But you're gone. You're in the land of nirvana, and you're free from the illusion of separation, the illusion that there is an I, for example, and the illusion that there's a separation between Brahman and Atman. And that's what the philosophies are. They're kind of like just spiritual companions on the journey. And so, especially for you and I, and a lot of people actually watching are interested in Jnana Yoga, are interested in Advaita Vedanta, because it is one of the direct paths to realization, one of the most intense paths. But again, as you were mentioning, it's intellectual discernment to a certain point. You don't want to get over to the other side of the river and then you start studying, I don't know, quantum theory or something like. As an example, like, you have to abide in that presence once you've crossed the river. Like, and actually, when you cross the river, it's like what Swami Abhinananda said. It's the Mahavakya of I am Brahman without the I. So there's only Brahman there. There's not there's not a difference between subject and object, or subject in this sense, subject and Brahman. So just to claim I am Brahman means you understand that there is Brahman, but you still don't reside as Brahman. And obviously the Mahavakya being translated into English, it translates that way, and it doesn't mean that, but we can't get clung to the sense of I-ness, so to speak, And that's the real role of the guru, right? Is to dissolve that I-ness and make sure you have a safe journey across the rivers of samsara, and don't ever come back. Don't touch the mind ever again, And And though a lot of people will think that that's difficult, but this is why, especially the Hindu scriptures, discuss that you can just go about your life, the nishkarma karma aspect in Bhagavad Gita, you can go about your life without being attached to the fruits of your action. Because that, as you mentioned, that I is impermanent. It doesn't exist, you know. And we're so attached to the fruits of our action, right, in society, like, because we want to be someone, we want to be recognized and respected for doing things. And that's all the low self-esteem of the I trying to be validated.
Yeah, to get recognized by eyes of others and whatnot, but that's actually very counter-effective to what you actually want to achieve, though.
Exactly.
You can only excel when you stop identifying with skill or role, whatever you have, and that's the. But again, that's just kind of toughest thing that we all need to get over.
Yeah.
We need to keep practicing to kind of dissolve this idea of I, and there are many ways to do it. And stop identifying with our roles and skills, whatever you are good at. You kind of need to disown that skill, that whatever you are good at. Skill that you're good at is just time that you're being good at, but you are a whole different story of conversation.
Exactly. Yeah, your skill is just something that happens.
Yeah.
It's something that you do,
Yeah.
but your true nature is not within the skill, or it's not the skill. That's the thing when you go to the guru, right? If you went to them and you said you were skillful at this and this and that, it's in a sense meaningless, right? It's something you do and something you're good at, but not the nature of your existence.
Well, that's why including Ramana and Papaji and all these Advaita Vedanta teachers always say, if someone come up to them and say, I have this problem, and they always say that who is the I who is talking right now?
Exactly.
What is this I that you're talking about, that I have problem, or I am good at something? And it's for someone who are not familiar with this idea, be like they think you might be a bit of a tripper, right?
Yeah, 100%.
It's a funny idea. Who is the I? But I means, like that's
we've had that experience with some friends, right? So
what language are you speaking, basically? But that's the question you want to get to the bottom of it.
Of course, yeah.
Like who am I referring to? Like what is this I that I try to figure it out?
It's a story, right? You're referring to a story, like it's your I is this accumulation of vasanas, of karma, wound up in your samskaras, and this story that we believe about ourselves, which actually keeps us hostage, right?
Absolutely, yeah. It's just accumulation of histories and stories and psychological problems, bondage and limitation, all 10, 20 different identifications that you created for yourself from the past. And it's all collection of that. That's that I that we're always referring to.
Yeah.
We need to break out of that way of thinking.
Yeah. Because what the Guru tells you is that there's only consciousness, right? So there's only Brahman, there's only this fundamental ultimate reality, which we all are, which we are consciousness. And so this here, right, and this here, these are localizations of consciousness. So this is just a localization of the consciousness of Brahman. It's a localization of consciousness. And the problem is we identify with the equipment of this localization. And this is the equipment. and also the vrittis, the mind stuff that we have. And so we identify with all of that, the body, the nama rupa, the name, the form. And so we're all invested in the, like, for example, if we had Wi-Fi, right? We're clinging to the modem, like, how great is it to have the modem? It's like, what are you talking about? Like, what you want is the internet. Like, it's not, I mean, like, what? Like, it doesn't make any sense. Like, you're sitting there, you're cherishing the modem. Like, isn't the point of the modem to have the internet? And the point of our existence as a localization of consciousness is to understand the consciousness, not the equipment, not the modem. You're sitting around attached to the vrittis, to the body, but this, as you mentioned, is impermanent in nature. It's gone. It's going to go, and it's going, whether you want to believe it or not. It might go today, it might go tomorrow, it might go 80 years from now, but it's going. So the quicker, as the Guru would say, the quicker you realize who you truly are right now is going to benefit your life going forward. But not even your life, it's just going to benefit, well, you're going to be realized. This life then is kind of just going to do its thing. You won't be the one acquiring a story anymore and believing the story, actually, and the story of others.
Then life becomes much easier, such an easy journey for an individual, isn't it? Like, you don't have to force anything, really.
No.
Once you realize it, like, you try to something happen that's impossible, seemingly impossible. Usually that kind of motivation come from material reason. But so that we suffer from it, right? We get stressful and whatnot. But once we realize that, like you said about that, this is a location of consciousness. Just like as you just mentioned, just like as a metaphor, like how ridiculous it is if you were to think that each individual leaves of the tree thinks
Exactly.
they're all that, instead of thinking of tree trunks and root of the tree, and right? How ridiculous it is.
100%.
Yeah, so you're not realizing where you really come from, right? So it's very important to always keep that in mind.
100%. And that's what the Guru does. The Guru tries to bring your mind back to that constantly, well, like what you're saying. You're the tree. The leaves are what the tree does. People is what the universe does. It's like what Alan Watts once said. The earth peoples. It's peopling.
Yeah, people as in verb.
It's peopling. Like a tree has apples, right? So the planet is peopling. But the problem is we're attached to like this little localization of consciousness as if it's the be-all and end-all. And we get so far ahead of ourselves. Like we think that our 100 years or so in this existence has like a significant meaning in the vastness of the universe. Billions and billions of years. And you are worried about this one little flea of time, this 100 years. You are so concerned and suffer and worry about this really tiny fragment of time, which in a sense, from a macrocosmic perspective, doesn't mean a thing. What it means is the realization that you are fundamentally the consciousness. That's what the whole point of existence is about. It's about understanding that this localization of consciousness is getting older and it's going to soon it's going to go back to the planet. But have you realized your true nature? That's the point of existence, you know?
Absolutely.
And that's the chance we all have. You know, it's a localization of consciousness. And you know, humans, we always get so far ahead of ourselves. We are as much a localization of consciousness as a dog is a localization of consciousness. They too are divine beings, so to speak. You know, not just dogs, cats, horses, cows, all of them.
And all living creatures.
All living beings are a localization of that one consciousness. doing its thing, in perfect harmony, and that's the Tao, that's Brahman, you know what I mean? That's people say, well, how is the world? It has an intelligence, and yes, that is the intelligence of it. Science don't accept that because we got to get into mysticism. Then they don't want to get into mysticism, but they know that there's an intelligence there that's propelling the universe in a direction. And Vyasa was one who documented that evolution of the world using metaphor, using myth, and it just makes sense, And that's what the gurus follow, and that's what the nature of our role as a spiritual seeker is to go through that complete dissolution of the I. And, a lot of people are frightened about that. A lot of people, may, for example, a lot of people are interested in Taoism these days, right? And but they only think of Taoism as in Wu Wei. They think of Taoism only as in living effortlessly. And yes, that is a component of it. But the one who lives effortlessly has dissolved the sense of identity. It's not about acquiring wealth and, applying feng shui to your house so you can bring riches. It's about the complete dissolution of the I. This is what Lao Tzu and Zhuangzi are talking about.
Yeah, without understanding that fundamental, which is dissolving the idea of I, then you can easily misinterpret the philosophy of it.
Yep.
Like the law of attraction and all this type of thing. If you imagine it'll happen and this type of new age ideas and whatnot. It's not about that. It's all about understanding the identity that you strongly cling to, identifying that, and you put the work in order to dissolve that idea of I, so that you can completely be one with the path of nature, law of nature, and you moving with it as one, and there is no you anymore, and that's the ultimate place that you want to get to. It's not about misinterpreting in convenience of your own idea.
No, of course
right?
not. Yeah, of course.
That's what people like to do.
Well, as you mentioned, with law of attraction and sort of new age ideologies like that, it's all still egocentric and still, in a sense, it's based on money. In some sense, it's based acquiring wealth and having good fortune, and that had infected things such as even the I Ching over its evolution. Right, the I Ching went from a book of wisdom to a book of divination. And people don't even know that it's a book of wisdom anymore. They just think it's about a book of divination and so forth and so on. And that doesn't mean that we don't wish riches upon people. Of course, we want everyone to do well physically and live a good life. But you got to remember what the life is about. You know what I mean? Like, it's about that realization, and it's not about attracting things to your life to make it feel better. The spiritual path is to not avoid pain. It's about recognizing pain, but also not being affected by it, like realizing it for what it is. It's just a part of the jiva, of this I, this self that this story about yourself that you believe. And again, once you're free of that story, then that's the great boon. That's the great realization. That's the enlightenment. And as you know, I've said this to many people privately who are interested in law of attraction and so forth and so on, and they fully believe it. But then when you talk to them about like the path, say, of an avadut, you know what I mean, which is the complete dissolution of I, like it's just like the most radical path, they're just like, it's a bit overwhelming, you know what I mean? Like if you give them the Avadutta Gita, and like that constant, it being a Nidhyasana text, so one of the texts beyond the pale of enlightenment, and when they constantly, it gets too much for them, because it's reinforcing that you don't exist. You weren't born and you won't die. Your true nature is beyond that process. And that's too overwhelming for people, you know. So, and as we know, the path of an avadute's one of the most extreme direct paths, you know, followed by sages like Dattatreya going back, and also more recent times, Sai Baba of Shirdi, these sorts of sages, you know, like they're complete avadutes who just, in some sense, like Vairagya just renounced the whole world, because the world in itself, from a story base, is a fiction, you know, that we all think is happening according to our own story. And see, this is complete Maya. This is an entire fiction. So they are the ones who just erase the story and leave the pages blank, and just live life and allow it be as it is, and not touch the eye, not touch the accumulation of their story, so to speak. You know, they all had a story before they were realized, like anyone. But anyone who follows New Age ideology will cringe at the idea of the dissolution of I, because that means that the one who wants wealth, the one who wants respect and fame and good fortune doesn't exist, never has existed, and never will exist. It's a story. It's like a Hollywood film. You watch a Hollywood film, once you finish the Hollywood film, it's over. It didn't exist. It's a story. It had actors, it had a theme, it had a plot, but it's not reality. It is in a visual context, in an image, and likewise with our mind. We have the images of our story in our mind, but often the images are not, you know, they're not real.
I mean, go back to like speaking of guru and teachers. Like, what's your suggestions for people who are living society, have a day job to go to, and living in kind of a repetitive routine week after week? What's your like suggestions for those who live in that kind of lifestyle, but seeking knowledge at the same time, and like how would they find a guru if they want to, or do they need one, or do they don't need one, or what would you say? Like,
it's a tough question, because it comes down to the aptitude of each individual. You know, I would recommend from my own personal experience, because I had been there once upon a time, you know, in a working environment and that, like, but any spare moment you have, you absorb yourself in the knowledge. You know, you find a teacher online that you feel like you can learn from. You watch their satsangs or whatever they have. You learn their meditative techniques. You apply the meditation in the spare time that you have. You try to avoid as much entertainment as possible, you know, because that can, you know, because we use so much energy at our day jobs. I sympathize with people. You use so much energy at your day job, you just want to come home and chill out and relax. But often when we do that, when we go to bed at night, we feel like we kind of wasted a bit of time too, you know what I mean? Like, I mean, start small, maybe keep some entertainment time there, but dive into knowledge. Like, get the books you're interested in, watch the satsangs you need to do, and also look in your local community if there is some sort of spiritual group or a guru in your community, you know. Like, for example, like, we know in this city that there's the Vedanta Society here, and there's a Vedanta Society in many places. So you can go there. There's plenty of Zen meditation groups and this and that. And if you're not such a group person, then do it, you know, like, do it, keep your distance and do it, you know, slowly. Like, you know, a lot of us who are on the spiritual path are very quiet and like our own self-isolation. And so do it at a distance, you know what I mean? And you and I have been in settings like that where you can kind of blend in and no one really knows your name, and it doesn't matter in that sort of group, you know what I mean? And I would say that's the best course of action. But it comes down to the aptitude. Again, if you're a savant or someone like this, you're probably just like Ramana Maharshi, just learning the knowledge and then meditating, and you might be like advancing on the path, or so-called advancing on the path, quicker than most people. And there are people like that, for sure.
It could be something like this, that as long as you have committed to the path,
Yeah.
then and you just follow the path, and you just being more disciplined in your daily life, just changing habit of doing things, and like you just said, just managing time of reading or watching a satsang or something like that. That could be a good start, I suppose. And once you, I think starting is important. The first step is the hardest step to take, but once you're in it, I think you kind of it kind of unfolds, doesn't it?
Of course, yeah.
You kind of know what you are interested in, and what kind of teacher that you feel more resonate with, and you would go with that, and eventually you would put yourself in a good position where you can actually be in the presence of those individuals or whatnot.
Yeah. Because you're pointing your life in the right direction, right? You and I were once young little grasshoppers, and we pointed our life in the right direction, and we are where we are now. You know, you have to have that, like in Buddhism, they speak of bodhicitta. You have to have like that dedication, that effort towards your own realization. That has to become your life's purpose, so to speak. You know what I mean? From a certain stage, there is no purpose, but from where we are as jivas, there has to be that dedication, and that's what this life is about. That's the main thing in life, is me getting to that ultimate stage. That focus on mukti, on moksha, is what I should be focusing my life on. And if we use Hinduism as an example, we follow our dharma to get to that stage, our virtue, our path, our natural path as an individual. And that's what we ought to do. But we have to make that dedication. You have to almost have like your own private sadhana. Is your life becomes your sadhana, right? So instead of like going to Tiruvannamalai for sadhana, like you and I have done many times, our lives have become our own sadhana. You know what I mean? Where our life is focused on that. You know, how many times have our friends, they get bored with us because all we talk about is this stuff. You know what I mean? Of course, we're interested in their life, but what you and I are focused on is knowledge.
I think at the maybe beginning stage, this can happen very often. We have witnessed this before, that many people who have dedicated this path, but its practice becomes much easier when you're in a place like in a monastery or in Arunachala and even Bodh Gaya and places like that, because there are a lot more people who are dedicated to the same path that you are dedicated, and so it's much easier. So that people make a trip, they put effort to make a trip to go to those places because they want to maintain their deep practice. But then when they go back to their country and familiar environment, then they get easily swept by the influence from people around you and the job that you have or whatnot. So they easily be less motivated, and they kind of not as committed as they were because of the environmental circumstance has changed. But like you mentioned, we have to put effort in to make your daily life as sadhana, because not everybody is to become a monk, for example.
No.
Not everybody is to become Swami or something like that. Everybody has different background and characters and whatnot. So,
and you don't have to be any of that too.
Well, exactly. That's it. Make your life and your path that you chose to be your sadhana. And I think that's the best way to go about to practice.
Exactly.
Yes.
Because that's freedom. That's, you're here to experience liberation. So you can only do that if you're pretty much dedicated to it, right? Sincere about it. It's not such, in some sense, it's not such an easy path because we're talking about a very subtle level here, right? Like of the mind and of the sense of identification we have that we think we are, and we're not. And so it is a very subtle realm where we're working in, and which also is why it's very, scary for a lot of people to follow that. But I would say to people, don't be so afraid of what people will say about you, or how they think you should behave when you return to those familiar environments that you're from. Because if your dedication is this, it shouldn't matter what other people say. You know me, obviously, and you know that when I was younger and meditating a lot and studying and went through a lot of deep spiritual processes, that a lot of friends, disappeared. And that's nature. You know what I mean? Like, we can't get too carried away that we're going to have the same friendships forever and we need to maintain. We become a hostage to maintaining friendships and relationships. You don't want to be one of those people. You want to be a person who's dedicated to this. And if those people don't continue to respect you for what you're doing and this and that, that's okay. Those friendships will drop away. The real sincere friendships will remain because they know that this is what you do now. You are dedicated to this. Don't be a hostage to what people think of you, no matter if it's your family or if it's your friends. It doesn't matter. You're dedicated to this because you know it's the truth. It's the path.
I guess what's hurting is that you get disappointed by those friendships. You thought that was a genuine friendship, but when you realize it's not, then it's a bit painful feeling. But at the same time, I think what we need to learn is that to allow them to be that way as well. I think.
Of course, yeah. Allow them to trip out. And
yes. Because everybody is different, and we all have different aptitude at things and whatnot. So it's almost selfish to think that friendship is gonna be always supportive in your favor, right? Somewhat. So when that happens, it's just kind of just allow that friendship or individual to be what it will be.
What it will be, yeah.
And that's, again, comes with the acceptance. That could be, again, part of practice too, isn't it?
Well, it is.
Yeah, it's acceptance of that circumstantial change.
You're not interfering with nature. Yeah. You're letting nature run its course. You're not looking at your friend as a part of nature, but your friend, so to speak, or your family is just, doing their thing. So you allow them to do their thing. It becomes a problem when we become emotional about it and we identify with our story, see? We identify with our story, we become emotional. I went through this a long time when I was younger because I had long-term friendships that fell apart because of the way I was. And then it took me a while to assimilate that and to understand that element of it where I had to just allow it to be, Though at the beginning I wasn't like that. I was reaching out, man, what's happening? But then you could tell that the energy had shifted, it had changed. And then, so you just have to allow it to be, we're just too involved in our emotional story of ourselves. And though that has a beautiful quality to it, it also holds us back from our spiritual liberation. It holds us back from understanding what you and I are talking about today. And this is why it can be tough when you're around a guru, because you go to the guru with all of these emotional things, and the guru is just like, man, keep your story at the door. I don't want to hear your story.
It's not like a psychotherapy.
It's not psychotherapy session. This is not psychology. This is not, you're not seeing a psychiatrist here. You're seeing a guruologist. So you need to leave your story at the door. That's what turns a lot of people off sometimes, right? Because the guru or the spiritual teacher can be a complete son of a gun. You know what I mean? Like, they can be brutally honest, which actually they have to be, You see a lot of New Age people, and we've encountered this too because we've been around a lot of New Age people in the past, that they get very emotional when they see the guru or the teacher be very blunt and honest with people. And people go, oh, he's or she's so completely dishonest, disheartening, and doesn't have a sensibility. Their job is not psychiatry, like you said. You want to go and see a psychiatrist? Go see a psychiatrist. It's okay, you know what I mean? There is a place for that, but that's not with the Guru. The Guru is not there to tend to your story and to sympathize with your emotional sensibilities. They're there to dissolve all that so that you're free in this life. That would be like going to the psychiatrist saying, I want moksha. Oh, the psychiatrist, I don't even know what that word is. So why project that onto the Guru or any sort of spiritual teacher? They're there to teach the knowledge that they know. That's their skill. That's their, that's their craft. You don't go to a Tai Chi master and say, I want to learn Zazen. That would be ridiculous, wouldn't it? So you go to a Tai Chi master or someone, skilled in Neigong to teach you that. Same with Zazen, And so if you're going to a guru, obviously you are looking for jnana, you're looking for knowledge, you're looking for that sacred knowledge that has filtered down from the Vedas. That's what you're looking for. And so their responsibility is not there to promote your delusion or your illusions. It's there to dissolve those. And that's the good fortune for people who actually meet a guru. And you and I know this from personal experiences, especially with people like one of our closest examples is people who were who were a bit older and who had been involved or sat in satsang with Papaji, right? Because those are the people who are still alive, and there's not many people still alive with Ramana Maharshi. But with Papaji, and it's interesting because they had those experiences in the 80s and the 90s. There's such a deep connection to that those people just they're never going to go back into society or be,
go back to
normality. They're not going to be normal people again. And that's the power, right? That's the power of that man set those people's life down a path that freed them from this hypnosis of being somebody in the world and holding this story as if it's gold, when in the end we got to give this story away when we die. And this is why people suffer when they die. They don't want to let go of the story.
Initially, that's what people are afraid of. I don't think people are afraid of the death, the event of death itself. What people are afraid of is that they'll have to eventually let go of that story that you have created in your own mind.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's the scary thing for a lot of people.
That's why you hear about a lot of stories about highly wealthy people, successful people who suffer the most because they have been respected, they have fame, they have wealth, they have notoriety, but it's going. And they built that. As opposed to the innocent person who is just unknown, shanti, lives a quiet, contented life. When death comes, they're ready. They're ready. Because they have had that realization, and they haven't also been confused with those sort of social adaptations that have happened over time, fame, fortune, adulation, all of these things that are very unnatural to the human species. So, which, as you said, confuses us at death and it makes us hold on to that story. We're so attached, not even to the relationships we have in most sense, it's to the story. Because the relationships are part of the story, right? So we're attached to that.
Yeah, we like to create these nice, fancy stories in our mind, and we identify ourselves with that story and try to maintain it. It's quite a stressful process, though.
It is.
Yeah. You need to put a lot of effort and attention to keep it that way in social life. Yeah.
Majority of the time we're fantasizing, right?
Yes.
We live in our fantasies.
I read this sentence this morning, that these names and roles in society that you get identified by other people, those things are there for public use. I was like, oh, that's a pretty cool way to put it.
Yeah,
Your
yeah.
name and roles are out there for public use, but they're not actually you.
No.
That cannot identify who you are and what you are.
Exactly.
It's just for public use. They make so much sense.
It has a utility, right? it has a utility value. Well, it does, right? Like, because it's social. So we can have a society based on nama rupa, on name and form, and which makes society good and can be harmonious at times, which is good. But that's also a reality that's still an illusion, because that is based on roles, names, not on who you are, and it's specifically for public use, like not for private. It's not privately who you are.
Yes.
It's really interesting, isn't it? And that's again what spiritual teachers will hammer on about, is that see, it's funny because that name is worldly. It's worldly. It has a use to the world, but it's not really who you are. And this is another thing that a lot of New Agers and people who are indifferent to spirituality don't understand, where they think that Eastern spirituality is like a nihilistic path because it's about going beyond the world. But you don't understand it because you're seeing the world as some sort of absolute reality. It's like, so your orientation is materialism as opposed to spiritual. Because if you spoke to an Advaita Vedantin or someone on the path of jnana about that, they would just say, well, you obviously haven't read the Mandukya Upanishad. You haven't read Gaudapada's knowledge that there is no life, no birth, no death. This is all sort of an illusion, like the ripples of the oceans of Brahman. And so, because they don't have that knowledge, see, they don't understand. So they just label it. We live in this whole world of categorizing everything. They label it as nihilistic or like not life affirming. But it's interesting because when you are non-worldly, when you practice renunciation, vairagya, then that's actually an affirmation of life, because you're allowing life to do what it does. Isn't it interesting? Where it's funny because materialists and people in general think that an affirmation of life is to go out there and do things and influence people and this and that. You're not trusting life. You're trying to influence it. You're trying to project your agenda on top of it.
In some sense, that way of thinking is nihilistic.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's ironic, isn't it? But see, it's just a little flick of the switch. They haven't been given that perspective by someone.
Because you have to feel insecure to feel that you need to go out and, affirm your position.
Yeah, exactly.
That's more nihilistic.
Exactly. You're not trusting the world. You're not believing that the world is doing its thing. Yeah. You're going out there and you're trying to influence it one way or the other. But the real affirmation of life is to be shanti. Let it do its thing. Your role here is to allow the world, not to interfere with the world, allow it do its thing, and come back into that realization of the Atman as Brahman.
And in that sense, I think that you kind of establish your somewhat sacred authority upon materialistic idea.
Yep.
Because you don't identify with the material world anymore, but then you have strong stance of spiritual or sacred position of yourself, then you have full authority of your own self.
Exactly.
You don't get swept by outside influence, that whatever that might be, from people or job or whatever, social status and all that. But once you have established that, you will no longer get moved by that anymore.
No. That's the immovable place, right? The bhumispasha mudra in Buddhism. The winds of the world are blowing, but you're completely firm. Like a stone Buddha just sitting there. Doesn't affect you. It's a place where we all want to get to. And as you were mentioning, that's the affirmation, the real affirmation of life. The affirmation that the world is completely fine without our interference of it. You know, and then people get in these debates, oh, but what about this? What about that? What about this? You're still vexed. Your whole perception is vexed on trying to change the world. You see? You should be vexed on understanding who you are truly, which is birthless, deathless, and in some sense never existed, the sense of the story of yourself. It exists like a thought bubble coming out of the ocean of Brahman, you know, and it will pop.
Yeah.
It will pop, and that water will return to the ocean.
Yeah.
We often we see, the thing is that we're trying to continue the story of ourselves by being vexed by questions of change, we should try and change the world and this and that. But you're still trying to keep alive that story. That's all you're doing. You're not doing the spiritual work. What jnana? You're not applying the knowledge to yourself. You're not doing it because you're making up excuses for not following that path. But shouldn't we go out and, you know, do this and do that? But you're still fighting. You're still not listening to what the guru or the spiritual teachers or the spiritual knowledge is saying. You know? And that's what we have to do. We have to be, as we were talking about before, you have to really dive into your own sadhana, and you have to be serious and dedicated to it. That's the whole point. That's the whole focus of what we should all be doing. You know? And that's what Vyasa set forth thousands of years ago. You know? And that's why it's important, actually, for all people interested in Eastern spirituality to actually read the Upanishads, read the Mahabharata, read these texts, read the Puranas, read all of these. Because you get a kind of a glimpse or an understanding of, you know, what our role is here. And also reading the Mandukya Upanishads, Kataka, with Gaudapada and Shankara, like reading these sorts of texts. And then if you want to get crazy, you're starting to read the Ashtavaka Gita and the Avadhuta Gita, reading these Nidhyasana texts which are beyond the pale of enlightenment, which puts your focus then in the direction of what's going on here. You know, as you know with me, like, for whatever reason, I didn't move my way up through the ranks. The first text I was given was the Avadhuta Gita, and then you start from the top and go down. So, I mean, I don't know if that was beneficial or not, but for some reason I understood what the Avadhuta Gita was saying. I don't know if that says anything, you know, about myself, but I don't want to get into that. But I started from the top down, you see. After that, then I was interested in reading the Bhagavad Gita and the Upanishads and so forth and so on down the line. But, you know, we have to be really dedicated and focused and also, you know, really be respectful to the spiritual evolution of the East. You know, that's one of you and I, our biggest loves, is the history and the evolution of spirituality in the East, from Vyasa all the way down, all the way through Buddhism, and, you know, then you have Taoism over here, and, you know, it's such a wonderful history and an accumulation of the greatest knowledge in the world, right? That has been passed down from guru to disciple for who knows how long. We can only speculate. Indians may say 10 to 15,000 years, and that may be true. You know, we don't know. We don't know. Because we don't know who the rishis were, how far the Veda went back. Did it go back further than the rishis? Was it just common knowledge? You know, this Shruti heard knowledge, how far does it go back? We know when the Smriti started, but we don't know where the Shruti started, which is really interesting, right? So, that's about it. We covered it all. So, hope you guys are having a good Guru Purnima, if you celebrate that. And make sure always respect the spiritual teachers, and always, you know, pay homage to your own teachers or the great teachers, especially the lineage of Eastern masters, like so Vyasa, Buddha, Mahavira, Lao Tzu, Zhuangzi, Gaudapada, Shankara, go down the line, how far you want to go. But always pay respect, because they are the ones who have put forth this spiritual law that we are all benefiting from in this day and age. So, I hope you're all having a good day, and hope you enjoyed that podcast, and look forward to seeing you guys in the next one.